Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, and Larry Holmes, three of boxing's greatest champions, had one thing in common: they all feared one man. Ernie Shavers. No, the strongest man. Just in terms of Ernie Shavers, really. Yeah man. Strong man John Fragan. George Foreman, he hit hard. He's got to hit at his record. But despite his terrifying power, he never won a world title. Instead, his life unraveled into financial ruin, failing health, and crushed dreams that led to dead-end jobs. How did the most feared puncher in history never wear the crown? And why did his downfall outside the ring become an even greater tragedy? To understand that, we need to go back to where it all began. Ernie Shavers wasn't just born into hardship. He was born into a war zone. Garland, Alabama, 1944. The Deep South under Jim Crow wasn't just a tough place for a black family. It was a death trap. A simple glance in the wrong direction could get you beaten. A harmless word could get you killed. And for the Shavers family, that nightmare became real. It all started with Ernie's father, Curtis Shaver, committing an unforgivable sin. Standing up for himself, he pulled a gun on a white man to defend what was his. But for a black man who threatened a white man in the segregated South, there was no justice system to turn to, only a lynch mob to run from. The Klan didn't hesitate one night. 20 white, hooded terrorists stormed into the Shavers' tiny, three-room shack. Imagine it through young Ernie's eyes. Shadowy men in white robes, faces hidden, ripping apart your home, while screaming slurs that carved themselves into your soul. Their threats weren't empty. Everyone in that house knew what happened to black men who fought back. That scene burned into young Ernie's memory, changed him forever. He learned a brutal truth. Power didn't belong to the righteous. It belonged to those willing to wield it without mercy. Years later, fans would marvel at his raw power, his iron will, his refusal to back down in the ring. What they didn't realize was that they were witnessing the product of a life that began with surviving America's most violent expression of white supremacy. After that horrifying night, the Shavers family fled Alabama in December 1950, leaving behind the Klan but never the memories. Up north in Newton Falls, Ohio, Ernie found a new kind of struggle, one that built him rather than tried to break him. On a 5-acre farm, he chopped wood, hauled feed, and plowed land, forging the raw strength that would one day shake the boxing world. But Ernie wasn't just growing stronger. He was preparing, because the next time he met violence, it wouldn't find him helpless. It would find him swinging back. The resilience that helped Ernie Shavers escape the South would soon find a new battleground. While Ali and Foreman were racking up amateur medals, Ernie was punching a clock at General Motors, suffocating in a life of routine. He knew he was built for more than an assembly line. At 22, an age when most future champions already had hundreds of amateur fights, Shavers walked into a boxing gym with zero experience and announced he wanted to be a pro. Any trainer with sense would have laughed him out of the building. Boxing demands years of refinement, not raw muscle. While Ali had over 100 amateur fights by age 18, Shavers was still figuring out how to make a fist. But he wasn't interested in conventional wisdom. A lifetime of farm labor had sculpted his physique into something out of folklore. Shoulders like boulders, arms like tree trunks, hands that could crush walnuts. Trainers didn't see an unpolished rookie. They saw raw destruction waiting to be unleashed. With barely enough training to wrap his hands properly, Shavers turned pro in 1969. And what happened next defied all boxing logic. 44 wins in his first 47 fights. 27 straight knockouts, 20 of them in the first round. His right hand wasn't just powerful, it was nature's perfect knockout weapon. Boxing veterans who had seen Marciano, Liston, and Foreman were left speechless. This wasn't just a hard puncher. This was something they'd never seen before. Or are they going to stop it? It looks like it may be all over. And it is all over when most heavyweights landed. Opponents got hurt when Shavers landed. They shut down as if someone had pulled the plug. But beneath the highlight Real knockouts cracks formed. His stamina questionable, his defense barely there. His reliance on a single weapon predictable. These were flaws that years of amateur fights should have smoothed out. But Shavers had skipped that chapter. He had no foundation. And yet, he was something terrifying. His right hand was so devastating that even Muhammad Ali, who had faced the hardest hitters in history, admitted Shavers hit him like no one else. And I don't know why I picked on him at this late in my career. I didn't really believe he was as good as he was. I predict he was won around 7. But he was good. He took all I had and hit real hard. 19 times in the first round. Shavers entered boxing without fear because he didn't know his own limitations. That sledgehammer right hand didn't just win fights. It terrified men who were supposed to be fearless. Even George Foreman, the machine who folded Joe Frazier like a lawn chair. I am the danger, I'm the one to be afraid of definitely. I'm the one who can hit you and knock you unconscious. Wanted no part of Ernie Shavers. I never fought Ernie Shavers. Thank goodness he confessed. For one of the most intimidating men in boxing history to openly admit relief. That tells you everything about the respect and fear Shavers commanded. The boxing world crowned him with an ominous nickname, the Black Destroyer, and for good reason. When his right hand connected, fights didn't just end, they stopped cold. As you see him there wobbling, the legs were going. We'll be back talking with Ernie Shavers in just a minute. But for all his earth-shaking power, Shavers' climb to the top was anything but smooth. His terrifying reputation masked the cracks in his foundation. The first real fracture appeared in 1973. Jerry Corey, a battle-worn contender, did the unthinkable, knocking out the knockout artist in the very first round, taking the mandatory 8-count 5-6-7. The referee talks to him. Suddenly the boogeyman was human. The loss exposed the truth. Shavers was a wrecking ball with no blueprint. The whisper started, was raw power alone enough? That doubt deepened when Bob Stallings, a journeyman with more losses than wins, handed Shavers an even more humiliating defeat. Just when it seemed Shavers might disappear into obscurity, in walked Don King, a promoter with hair as wild as his ambitions. King saw past the losses, he saw dollar signs. He saw knockouts, and he knew exactly how to sell them. Under King's guidance, Shavers clawed his way back, flattening former WBA champion Jimmy Ellis in the first round. But it was his war with Ron Lyle in 1975, a fight so violent it was called the Third World War, that truly cemented his reputation. Shavers lost in the 6th round, but even in defeat, he left the world convinced this man was one of the most dangerous fighters to ever lace up gloves. Despite never holding a world title, champions avoided him. Mysterious injuries popped up when his name was mentioned. Sparring partners left gyms, whispering about what they'd seen. Muhammad Ali knew the truth, but instead of acknowledging the threat, he did what Ali always did. He mocked it. He nicknamed Shavers the Acorn, poking fun at his bald head. But behind the jokes, Ali knew. Everyone knew by 1977, when Shavers finally earned his shot at Ali, he was no longer just a contender. He was the nightmare heavyweights prayed they'd never have to face. In gyms across America, trainers warned young fighters with a single word: Shavers, because in boxing, it doesn't matter how many rounds you're winning. One perfect punch from a true destroyer is all it takes. September 29, 1977. The night boxing's most feared puncher finally met its greatest showman. Madison Square Garden crackled with anticipation. Ernie Shavers, the human sledgehammer, had his shot at Muhammad Ali. And one question echoed through the crowd: what happens when the hardest punch in heavyweight history collides with the greatest chin? From the opening bell, Ali played his usual games, taunting, grinning, whispering in Shavers' ear. But Shavers wasn't there to talk. He was there to land, and in round 2, he did. A thunderous overhand right detonated on Ali's jaw, momentarily stiffening the champion's legs, a rare sight. But Ali wasn't just tough. He was crafty, he played possum, exaggerating the damage to bait Shavers into punching himself out. It worked. Shavers hesitated, cautious not to empty his tank too early. As the fight wore on, Ollie leaned on his veteran tricks. He'd coast for 2 minutes, then steal rounds with late flurries. The garden roared with each Ollie combination. But those watching closely saw the truth. Shavers was landing the cleaner, harder shots by round 10. The script seemed set: Ollie dances, Shavers stalks, but boxing loves an upset. As the championship rounds began, something changed. Shavers wasn't fading. Ollie was in round 13. Shavers hammered Ollie with right hands that shook the arena. By round 14, Ollie's famous shuffle had become a stumble. His corner grew silent as Shavers' punches drained the life from their fighter. Then came round 15, a final brutal war. Both men, battered and sweat-soaked, stood their ground trading bombs. Ollie, summoning every ounce of his legendary heart, staged a desperate last-minute rally that nearly dropped the exhausted challenger. The bell rang with both warriors still standing. Then came the verdict: unanimous decision, Ollie. The one and only Muhammad Ali. Boos rained down from the rafters. Shavers stood motionless, the bitter taste of injustice settling in. Then the numbers came out. CompuBox stats showed Shavers outlanded Ali 266 to 208. He'd connected with more power shots in 8 of the 15 rounds. Perhaps the most damning evidence: Ollie's own doctor, Ferdy Pacheco, was so horrified by the punishment his fighter took, he urged him to retire immediately. The punishment Ollie took was unacceptable, Pico later said for Shavers. This was boxing's cruelest reality. You can outland the champion, batter him, even have his own doctor plead for his retirement, and still leave empty-handed. The scorecards read Ollie, but the whispers in boxing gyms told a different story. If Shavers had fought any other champion that night, he might have left with the belt. If the Ollie fight showed Ernie Shavers how cruel boxing could be, his war with Larry Holmes showed him just how heartbreaking it truly is. Have you ever been one step away from everything you've ever wanted, only to watch it slip through your fingers? Shavers lived that nightmare on September 29, 1979. The road to this second title shot was paved with destruction. Just months earlier, he bulldozed former heavyweight champion Ken Norton in a single round. This wasn't just a win, it was a statement. Norton had gone the distance with Ollie. He had broken Joe Frazier's jaw. Shavers didn't just beat him, he obliterated him. That kind of performance demands a title shot, and the boxing world was listening. But Shavers knew the challenge ahead. Larry Holmes wasn't just any champion. He was the purest boxer of his era. They had fought once before in 1978, and Holmes had used his textbook jab and smooth footwork to outclass Shavers over 12 rounds. When the rematch was announced, most experts expected more of the same. And for 6 rounds, that's exactly what they got. Holmes looked untouchable. The jab snapped Shavers' head back again and again. The challenger lunged and swung at air. If you were scoring at home, you might have thought the fight was already over. Then came the 7th round. And with it, 20 seconds that nearly changed boxing history. Shavers finally found his range and uncorked the perfect right hand. Not just a clean shot, the kind of punch fighters dream about. The kind of punch that erases scorecards, rewrites careers, and turns contenders into champions. Holmes went down face first, motionless, silent. The crowd at Caesar's Palace exploded. Ringside writers scrambled to draft headlines about the new heavyweight champion of the world. Shavers stood in the neutral corner, watching the seconds tick away, watching his destiny unfold. 1 second, 5-7. Holmes wasn't moving. 8. Then impossibly, Holmes rose. His legs were jelly. His eyes fogged over, but he got up. Later he would call it his resurrection. He would admit it was the hardest punch he had ever taken. And yet somehow he survived. Shavers had thrown his Sunday punch. He had landed the dream shot. And it still wasn't enough. From that moment on, the fight became torture. Holmes cleared his head, reset his jab, and took control. Shavers, who had spent everything trying to finish the fight, began to fade by round 11. The tables had completely turned. Holmes, now the aggressor, battered Shavers with pinpoint combinations. The referee stepped in, waving it off. And just like that, the dream was over. 20 seconds, that's all that stood between Ernie Shavers and the heavyweight championship of the world. If Holmes had stayed down for just 3 more seconds, history would have been rewritten. Shavers would have gone from feared contender to undisputed champion. His legacy would have been immortalized, his financial future secured. Instead, he joined boxing's most tragic fraternity, the greatest fighters to never win a world title. The man whose right hand had made legends tremble would spend the rest of his life haunted by what almost was. Because in the end, Shavers wasn't beaten by skill, speed, or even age. He was beaten by the cruelest force in boxing, fate. After missing his last shot at glory, Ernie Shavers faced an opponent far worse than Ollie or Holmes. One he couldn't outpunch. His body was breaking down. The sport that once cheered his name had already moved on, and now he was fighting a battle he had no chance of winning. What the world didn't know was that Shavers was already compromised. His right hand was still a wrecking ball, but his vision was failing him. A detached retina, a death sentence for a fighter, had stolen his ability to see punches coming. Nevada boxing official Dwayne Ford would later compare the diagnosis to an AIDS diagnosis. In the 80s, that's how final it was. But Shavers had no choice. Reality hit harder than any opponent ever could. He simply couldn't afford to stop fighting. In 1980, just months after nearly becoming champion, he stepped into the ring against Randall Tex Cobb, hiding his terrifying secret. Can you imagine trying to dodge a 200-pound heavyweight's fists when you can barely see them? Shavers fought through pure instinct, but the damage was inevitable. The power was still there, but the precision was gone. And in a sport where milliseconds decide survival, that was a death sentence. Outside the ring, his financial world collapsed just as quickly as his health. The predators circling him weren't in the ring anymore. They wore suits. Bad investments, broken trust, one bad deal after another drained the fortune he had bled for. While Ollie and Holmes had financial teams securing their futures, Shavers was alone. The pain piled up, the bills stacked higher. The world forgot. Then, in a heartbreaking twist, desperation led him to do the unthinkable. At 50 years old, with a damaged eye, worn-out reflexes, and the mileage of 1,000 wars, Shavers attempted a comeback. It ended in 2 brutal rounds. The hardest puncher in heavyweight history, a man once feared by giants, was now defenseless. And the sport that had once made him rich and famous had nothing left for him. With no more options, he crossed the Atlantic in England. His name still carried weight, but not enough to save him. The man who once stood toe-to-toe with Ollie was now working security at bars and restaurants. Imagine that, seeing patrons walking past him, never realizing the quiet man at the door had once possessed the most feared right hand in boxing. How does a man go from nearly winning the heavyweight championship to standing outside a pub, watching life move on without him? It wasn't just one bad decision. It was a cascade, one injury, one financial misstep, one desperate payday at a time. Each attempt to claw his way back only dragged him further down. The sport that made him a legend had taken everything. All that was left was the pain. The man who once struck fear into the toughest heavyweights on the planet spent his final years on an entirely different battlefield. What could possibly replace the roar of the crowd and the rush of combat for someone whose identity was built on destruction? For Ernie Shavers, the answer was faith. The feared knockout artist became an ordained Christian minister, trading the fury of his fists for the power of his words. He carried the same intensity into pulpits across America and England that he once brought to the ring. "I used to knock men down with my fists," he told one congregation with a gentle smile. Now I hope to lift them up with my words. But finding spiritual peace didn't erase the physical consequences of war. Every sermon came from a body that had paid dearly for those 90 professional fights. Each punch he threw, each war he waged had chipped away at him. His once superhuman strength had left him with failing vision, chronic pain, and neurological damage. The inevitable price paid for a career built on violence. Still, boxing never forgot him. At conventions and reunions, fans lined up to shake his hand. The same hand that had once terrified an entire division. Champions came and went, but the question always lingered. Does he hit as hard as Ernie Shavers? In 2022, just one day after celebrating his 78th birthday, Shavers passed away. A poetic final round before the bell. His record remains staggering. 76 wins, 70 knockouts, and 23 first-round finishes. Yet the one number missing, a world championship, keeps him out of many all-time lists. And that's what makes Ernie Shavers one of boxing's greatest what-ifs. What if he'd started younger? What if he'd had the technical training to sharpen his raw power? What if that perfect right hand against Larry Holmes had landed just a little cleaner? Would we be talking about him as a dominant champion instead of a devastating contender? We'll never know. But one thing is certain: his legacy as the hardest puncher the heavyweight division has ever seen remains untouched in his final years. Shavers rarely spoke of the price he'd paid. "I traded the thunder of 10,000 voices for the quiet peace of knowing myself," he wrote in his autobiography. The man who once shattered bodies with his fists had found serenity, proving that even the most destructive forces can, in the end, find peace. In boxing's brutal theater, raw talent without timing is destiny denied. No one embodied this more than Ernie Shavers, a man with power fit for a king, but a fate that kept him from the throne. His 76.7% knockout rate and 7 KOs in 76 wins aren't just numbers. They're echoes of what might have been. His fists inspired fear. But fear alone doesn't put gold around your waist. Shavers himself understood the highs and lows of his journey. For someone who once seemed destined for a life in the cotton fields, "I reached the big time in boxing and in life. I've had a tremendous life, but I've also had my share of hard times." His words linger beyond boxing, a reminder that life's rhythm spares no one, not even the strongest. Like thunder without rain, Shavers never wore the crown, but his legend still hits harder than any title ever could. What do you think? Was Ernie Shavers the hardest puncher in boxing history? Or does someone else deserve that title? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of boxing's great what-ifs, be sure to like and subscribe for more legendary fight stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.